Whilst nobody can make mistakes, I know the British give most of the words for the language, full up a mostly English kind of lexicon. Anybody who hear Jamaican talk with thinks say a some African language, and not only the sound but some of the vocabulary, syntax and construction can trace right back to West Africa to the direct linguistic group where they come from.
Hello everyone and welcome. This is Learn Hittite. Long time no see. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different because instead of focusing on some ancient language or some crazy long-range language family proposal, we're going to be taking a look at one curious aspect of Jamaican Patois, also known as Jamaican Creole or simply Jamaican. All three terms you can actually find in the academic literature. Why are we doing this? You may well ask. Well, I recently had the pleasure of going on a family vacation to Jamaica, and quite frankly, what else is there to do on an 11.5-hour flight other than learn something about the local language? Plus, with Commonwealth Day being yesterday at the time of recording, it felt like the perfect time to finally take a bit of a closer look at a Creole, something that I've never actually done before. Now, armed with a book and a stack of PDFs on the flight, I started digging into the language. And what got my attention straight off the bat was how oftentimes features of patois were attributed to a West African influence, sometimes specifically to languages like Akan or Yoruba from the Niger-Congo family. However, many of these claims lacked references, or they simply cited other texts which didn't actually lead to anything solid. And that got me wondering, to what extent can these West African influences actually be traced back to any of the source languages, if at all that is possible to do? And how many of these features are maybe just common features of Creoles in general? That's going to be what we look at today, alongside some aspects of the history of research into Jamaican Patois. Now, this video isn't meant to be a deep dive into Patois, nor is it going to be overly academic. It's just my personal exploration into some interesting linguistic connections I found. I'm not here to prove or disprove anything, just take a look at some Patois alongside some often overlooked West African languages. I'll even try to recruit some native speakers to take a look at some of the sentences we'll be analysing and ask them to speak them out for us, which I think will be pretty interesting. However, I do have to say, if your goal is to learn Patois, this video might not be the video for you. However, of course, I do hope you'll stick around. But if you are specifically looking for videos on learning Patois, I can recommend these YouTubers instead. All the Patois examples in this video come from academic sources, which I'll reference on screen as usual. But do keep in mind that some of these texts are a little bit dated, so some of the Patois might reflect that. There is one interesting quote about Patois by Cassidy in 1961. Let me read that out for you right here. The most striking differences between the folk speech of Jamaica and the educated speech are not in the sounds, still less in the vocabulary, they are in the grammar. Hence why today we're going to be focusing more on these curious grammatical features of Patois, which may be shared across the Atlantic Ocean, and not really looking in any great detail at phonology or vocabulary. For those of you who may not know, the Jamaican linguistic community, like others worldwide, operates on a speech continuum. On the one end, you have this broad Patois, the strongest form of the Creole, and on the other, you have standard English. Speakers exist somewhere along this continuum, shifting between different levels of Patois and English, depending on various factors like situation, geography, the audience in question. For example, you're far more likely to hear near standard English during a political debate on the radio in Kingston, for example, but the same person might speak a broader variety of patois when chatting with friends or family in a rural setting. However, even in the most formal settings, many public figures will weave in elements of patois just to connect better with their audience. If you were wondering, this awesome diagram on screen was taken from Chang's 2014 work titled Basic Jamaican. As it says, this data is based on a 2006 language survey. It was actually conducted by the University of the West Indies, their Jamaican language unit. Unfortunately, it's a bit dated now, but as we can see, it reports 46.4% of the Jamaican population were bilingual speakers at the time. Interestingly, when I read into the methodology, this data was collected as part of a competency assessment interview, and they used a kind of forced code switching technique to assess bilingualism. I'm not sure how robust such a methodology is, although all the data and the methodology is available online on the website, so please feel free to go and check it out and come to your own conclusions. This data that you do see on screen is often repeated in various places online, but beware, it's not so clear-cut in my opinion. Interestingly, a year before they did another survey which just asked people if they spoke patois only or English only or they were bilingual, and that data reported about 80% of the population to be bilingual, so there's some difference there in the reporting. Additionally, a similar percentage of respondents, so about 80%, considered Jamaican to be a language. And of course, Jamaican Patois has spread far beyond the Caribbean, appearing in movies, music, global pop culture. Really, Jamaican Patois is a testament to the cultural powerhouse that is the island of Jamaica. So what's out there in terms of literature on Patois? Well, let's take a look. Aside from the numerous touristy phrase books on Patois, which are of varying quality, a more polished and technical work, yet something still accessible for the non-expert, would be Understanding Jamaican Patois by Adams, 1991. That's actually this book, which I've got right here. The reason I wanted to pick up this book specifically is that many other academic texts actually reference this book, and they also use samples of Jamaican from this book as well, so I wanted to get my hands on it for easy reference. However, if you do want a kind of phrase book, this is what I recommend that you pick up. Russell's An Etymology of Jamaican Grammar, 1868, marks the first academic analysis of Jamaican that I could find. The most prominent academic offerings come from the well-regarded Jamaican linguist Beryl Bailey, who has authored several books on Jamaican Creole, though they can unfortunately be a little bit tricky to find copies of. Jamaican Creole Syntax, A Transformational Approach, 1966, is a highly technical work. However, her Language Guide to Jamaica, 1962, provides a more accessible introduction to Patois. Even though these works are, let's be honest, somewhat dated in the scheme of things, they still stand up quite well, particularly the 1966 work, which is honestly exceptional in standard. Then there was a big gap in terms of output on Jamaican Creole until another equally exceptional work appeared in 2008 by linguist Stephanie Durleman, titled The Syntax of Jamaican Creole. Very thorough, very well researched, and highly recommended by myself. Farquharson in 2013 released a survey of Jamaican in the volume titled The Survey of Pidgin and Creole Languages. This text will be referred to in particular when we outline the features of Jamaican coming up. All of these texts will be used in today's video, and additional sources cited in screen and in the video description if space permits. So let me give you now a brief description of Jamaican Patois. It has a consonant inventory of 20 sounds alongside 5 vowels. 3 of these vowels can be lengthened and 4 can be nasalised, according to Farquharson 2013. The morphology of Jamaican Patois is primarily analytic, meaning it has minimal inflection and instead relies heavily on function words. Additionally, it makes extensive use of reduplication for a variety of functions. This we're going to talk about in detail later on. There's an interesting plural marker, in fact, dem, which again we'll be looking at in a bit more detail later on in the video. Compounding is also found in Jamaican Patois. The pronoun system distinguishes between three persons in singular and plural. There's a second person plural in Jamaican, which we can see on screen now, and it is curiously identical to the second person plural pronoun which we find in Igbo.
Uno. Uno.
This is quite an overt connection linking Patois with West Africa. Additionally, the first person singular form here is also the same as the first person singular pronoun in Aken, although obviously the situation here is less clear, as it may simply be a case that the English object form has been reinterpreted. Possessive pronouns are formed by placing fi before personal pronouns.
Afi una demia. Afi una demia.
Pronominal demonstratives can combine with adverbs of place for emphasis, and they may appear in either conjoint or disjoint structures. There's an example on screen now of a conjoint and a disjoint emphatic structure for this boy.
This ya boy. This boy ya.
Word order is typically subject, verb, object. Adjectives precede the noun. Negation is generally expressed with the following preverbal. Interestingly, this is said to be, by some scholars at least, to be a relic of the Spanish-speaking inhabitants during the period of Spanish rule. Not sure about that, but the claim does appear in the literature. There's a focus particle, and in focus constructions, the focus particle appears clause initially and is followed by the word to be focused. Verbs are not inflected. However, there is a rich array of tense, aspect and modal markers, some of which we can see on screen now. Controversially, according to some scholars at least, the tense and aspect system in Jamaican is dynamic and shows a tendency towards decreolization.
My uncle same did shot. John Wayne dance. Me we got a Sunday.
Okay, now it's time maybe to move on and for us to take a look at some of my, hopefully, interesting and curious observations regarding the West African influence on Patois. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the word mandem. And I've noticed that this term has been creeping into British English slang over the past, 20 years or so, at least. That's my observation anyway. I seem to hear it being used all the time in the lyrics of random youth music I hear at the gym. And just the other day, I actually saw, who was it? I think it was Micah Richards trying to explain the term to Gary Lineker, of all people. Now, I checked the OED, and while I expected it to rank higher, it's still only a band 2 word in terms of frequency. So maybe my whole take on its popularity is wrong or whatever. But the point is, I knew it existed in British slang and I knew it was a Patois loan. But until now, I had no idea what deeper history stood behind the term. According to the OED, mandem is a blend of man and them, where them originates from the third person plural pronoun, but has been reinterpreted functioning as a plural marker. This results in mandem, essentially being a plural form of man, obviously meaning men, or a collective group. However, in modern British slang, mandem can sometimes refer to just one person as well. But moving away from British slang and back to Jamaican Patois, I want to take this opportunity to take a closer look at the plural marker dem and number marking in general. So number marking can occur in a few ways, the primary ones being S or Z marking, so overtly derived from English, the S suffix is added to regular nouns, and we also have the dem plural word. Here dem is added to the noun to indicate plural, as we saw in our example with mandem.
Don't blame the youth them. Don't blame the youth them.
And while it's rare, there's even recorded cases where speakers double up, using both S marking and dem together. Also, fun fact, dem only appears on definite nouns, and it's almost always preceded by a definite article.
After I don't even remember the notes them again. After I don't even remember the notes them again.
The third commonly observed practice is to leave the noun unmarked, or we can call this zero marking, when the noun is understood to be plural from context. In the literature, when analysing number marking in Jamaican Patois, it is these three strategies that you most commonly see being discussed. It is also sometimes said that dem marking is associated more with basilect varieties, zero marking with mesolect, and S marking with acrolect varieties. But this is far too simplistic and in many ways is just incorrect. For a real deep dive into number marking in Jamaican Patois, check out Patrick's 2017 chapter on the issue. There's a ton of data in there about these marking strategies and their frequency of use. Highly interesting stuff. Now, the dem plural marker, being actually identical to the third person plural pronoun, is not found in Jamaican Patois before the late 19th century, according to some sources. So it's possibly a late development. This pluralization strategy isn't unique to Jamaican Patois. It crops up across Caribbean Creoles. In fact, in Pidgin's Creoles and Mixed Languages, 2015, this kind of pronoun-based pluralization is listed as a hallmark feature of Creoles. Looking into the APIX database, you can see that about a third of Creoles worldwide, so this is not just limited to the Caribbean, have a plural marker the same as a third person plural pronoun. And while it's the predominant pluralization strategy in a few, it often coexists with other pluralization methods like reduplication or stem changes. What's really interesting to me is how the pronoun being reinterpreted or additionally functioning as a plural marker strategy is often described by scholars as an Atlantic allele feature, so something which is found all across West Africa and in Caribbean Creoles. And it's not tied to one specific lexifier language either. It appears in English, Portuguese, French and Dutch-based Creoles. Now, there's not a ton of specific research that I could find on the West African origins of this feature, but the two works on screen now both discuss it, although it is quite difficult to track these works down. So I did some of my own research, and now if we journey to the other side of the Atlantic, it's possible to state that the third person pronoun shares relatedness with plural markers in a number of West African languages, and beyond in fact, because the relatedness appears to be observable across the Atlantic Congo branch of the Niger-Congo language family at a minimum. Now, the Niger-Congo language family is a complicated thing indeed, and which languages are included and excluded are debated. And I guess, knowing how it is in linguistics, they will be eternally debated. And of course, therefore, the internal structure is too heavily debated. One of the most pertinent questions recently has been the inclusion of the Mande group of languages within the Niger-Congo family as a whole. Increasingly, linguists see it as a distinct language family. However, those who still argue for its place within the Niger-Congo family would probably say that the Mande family just represents a particularly ancient branching. The Mande languages have no noun class system, which is a signature feature of the Atlantic Congo group of the Niger-Congo language family. In fact, for some, the presence of a noun class system is seen as being a key factor in the inclusion or exclusion of a language, amongst other factors of course, in the Niger-Congo language family as a whole. But it's reasonable to say that the presence of a noun class system is typical of at least the Atlantic Congo family, if not the Niger-Congo family. And noun class systems are important because they might be able to explain the use of plural markers as third-person pronouns. The noun class system of the Atlantic Congo language family is a system of categorizing nouns using prefixes or other affixes that also control agreement across the sentence. It works a bit like grammatical gender in languages like French or Spanish, but it's usually much more elaborate. Instead of just masculine and feminine, there can be 10 or even significantly more numbers of noun classes. The Bantu family has an average of 15, for example, based on characteristics like human versus non-human, singular versus plural, size, shape, animacy, abstractness. Now, the shared third-person plural pronoun and plural marker of Jamaican Patois is reflected exactly in the system we find in Ewe, an Atlantic Congo language. This has been pointed out previously though in the literature. Curiously, the author of the source material currently on screen notes on page 39 that the plural marker is derived from the third-person plural pronoun, not the other way round. However, no evidence is provided to support this claim, and I would be more inclined to believe that the opposite is in fact true. In Fula 2, we can see that we have a complete correspondence between the plural marker and the third-person plural pronoun, as is exemplified in the sentence on screen now. But it's not to say that we can see the relationship across the entire spectrum of the Atlantic Congo languages. For example, in Fongbe, we find no overt correspondence. Or take the Kru languages, for example. Now, admittedly, their presence and positioning in the Niger-Congo group is somewhat debated, but we can see no overt relationship between plural marking, which in this case is done via a change of vowel quality, and the third-person plural pronoun. Now, the relationship between plurals via the noun class system and the third-person plural pronoun is seen as such a common feature of the Niger-Congo languages that often the third-person plural pronouns are omitted from works studying pronominal systems. Take the following quote by Babaya, for example. An important note here is that we had to omit the third-person markers in the present paper. They are mostly part of the noun class system and therefore do not usually function as parts of the pronominal paradigms. So it seems to me here that within many languages of West Africa, particularly those in the Atlantic Congo group, we have an example of a plural marking morpheme associated with the human noun class being adopted as a third-person plural pronoun, which subsequently crossed the Atlantic as part of the function of dem in Jamaican Patois. Now, there's one more interesting observation about the pronominal system. Take a look at these personal pronouns for Fonbe and Patois. The Patois pronouns come from Bailey's 1966 work, but they're basically the same as you can find in Adams's 1991 and Patrick's 2007 descriptions. The major differences you might see in the pronouns just comes down to which additional mesolect forms get included. You'll notice that gender isn't differentiated in the pronoun system, and this is a feature often linked to West African influence. Authors like Adams, however, have already pointed this out in the literature. And yeah, genderless pronouns are absolutely a feature of many West African languages. Fonbe is just one example of this. But there's something even more interesting that key authors on patois, like Adams, Bailey and Patrick, all note. There's a distinct difference between the forms for animate and inanimate pronouns. This fact often gets overlooked in some more casual descriptions of patois. If you're looking at noun class systems in the Niger-Congo language family, you'll see that they often differentiate animate versus inanimate. So you'd expect some animate-inanimate distinctions in the pronominal systems too, right? And guess what? We don't have to look far. Take Dagbani, another member of the Atlantic Congo family, which has this same kind of pronominal distinction. I think how patois handles animacy versus inanimacy might be another example of West African influence. But when linguists point to the fact that Jamaican patois has genderless pronouns as evidence of a West African connection, I think that's a bit of a stretch, to be honest. As noted in the book Pidgins, Creoles and Mixed Languages, grammatical gender is barely relevant, if at all, in most Creoles, even in those that don't have any known West African connection. So while animacy distinction might hint at African influence, the lack of gendered pronouns is probably more of a Creole-wide feature than something uniquely African. Now, if you search through the literature, you'll find a wide range of features that are often attributed to such West African influences. The challenge isn't just identifying these features across a huge variety of West African languages, many of which are severely under-researched, with some lacking accessible grammars entirely. The real difficulty lies in figuring out whether a feature actually has roots in West African languages, or if it simply emerged during the creolization process itself. In other words, even if a Creole and a West African language share a certain feature, that obviously doesn't necessarily prove a direct connection. Similar structures can evolve independently in different linguistic environments. One thing that has been on my mind though, and I think it would make for a really interesting, though challenging area of future research, is a diachronic analysis of West African influence Creoles. Specifically, how should we interpret features that are strongly linked to West African languages in the literature, but don't actually appear or are not reported to appear in the earliest attested forms of these Creoles? Are these features later developments? Did they emerge from post-creolization substrate influence? Or were they present in spoken usage all along, just missed in early colonial documentation? Exploring these kinds of historical gaps could give us a much clearer picture of how West African influence evolves over time within Creole languages. Usually on this channel, when we're looking at proto-language reconstructions, we are particularly interested in the early attestations of a language, as that represents our closest contactable point to the proto-language and can offer invaluable insights. But for Creoles, maybe the situation is far more murkier. Some patois features, however, appear to be copy and paste examples from West African counterparts. Taking a look at some verbs, Cassidy, 1961, notes the verbal use of de in sentences such as in the following two examples.
Where him there? Where him there?
As we can see, de as a verb can be translated as to be. If we consult Turner's work on Africanisms, we can indeed find parallels in both Ewe, Ibo and Twi, where in all three languages the verb has various functions falling under the use of to be in English. Some supposed linkages are more dubious. Adams, citing Cassidy, suggests that the following Jamaican Patois term is derived from this Ibo expression, what happened, what was done.
Guinea milk. Guinea milk.
Cassidy translated this as what makes, which I guess gives it a closer resemblance to the patois, but really we have very little to go on here. It's a simple, common construction shared between patois and Igbo, and it isn't a particularly convincing example of West African influence. And then we come to things like reduplication. Reduplication is a linguistic process where a part of a word or the entire word is repeated to change its meaning or function. There are different types of reduplication, but when we're talking about patois, we're mainly concerned with full reduplication, where the whole word is repeated, although partial reduplication does also feature in the language. In patois, reduplication has the following primary functions. Please see on screen now with examples. This breakdown of reduplication broadly aligns with Godden's 2003 dissertation on reduplication in patois. Reduplication, however, is a common feature amongst languages of the world. According to the World Atlas of Language Structures, reduplication of some form was found in 85% of the 368 languages analysed, and is present in 86% of all creoles. Reduplication is a common and highly productive feature of the Niger-Congo languages, with a real range of functions overlapping with the uses found in Jamaican Patois and Caribbean creoles in general. In fact, you can find it outside the Niger-Congo languages of West Africa. Reduplication is attested in the Berber languages, for example, and Hausa. If you would, however, like to see some examples of what reduplication looks like in a Niger-Congo language, here we have some examples from Igbo. It's highly productive in the language and can appear through all word classes. The functions of reduplication overlap with Jamaican Patois and other Caribbean creoles.
Onacha opara opara. Onacha opara opara. Osi akoko akoko pata olom. Osi akoko akoko pata olom.
So, Jamaican Patois having productive reduplication isn't exactly evidence of a West African connection. In a 2004 article titled Echoes of Africa, Reduplication in Caribbean Creole and Niger-Congo Languages, the authors pointed out that superficial similarities between creoles and West African languages don't necessarily prove African influence, or what is known as substrate transfer. Because of this, they focused on specific types of reduplication that might show a stronger connection, not just the usual more of something meaning that reduplication often carries. Instead, they looked at reduplication that changed a word's category, like turning a verb into a noun, for example, or cases with unusual sound patterns, like tone shifts, which are much less likely to appear by coincidence. However, I feel it's important to add here that such more complicated forms of reduplication are still found in around a third of languages which have reduplication. The authors also tried to break away from some of the common assumptions made concerning the early history of Jamaican. It's often assumed that Akan and Ewe are the source languages behind substrate transfer in Jamaican Patois, with no real evidence in the literature to support this. So the authors suggest throwing a wider net when looking for potential West African influences. They even cite some preliminary data concerning ship departures, indicating that limiting considerations to just Akan, Ewe and closely related languages might be mistaken. However, broadening the net and including a wider spectrum of West African languages, of course, throws up additional problems. Some are poorly attested or barely described, and with a larger variety of languages, you get more and more features to compare, some of which will just by chance be paralleled in Jamaican Patois and other Caribbean creoles. So whilst this paper is still limited in many ways, the authors don't fall into the trap of considering every superficial resemblance as a West African influence. and they demonstrated a willingness to challenge certain assumptions regarding the origin of languages influencing patois. Right, that's going to be everything from me for today. Big thanks to the informants who helped me with the patois and Ibo, and of course a massive thanks to everyone who made it this far through the video. Please feel free to comment on every minor issue and mistake that you managed to pick up on. All engagement is good engagement. I really enjoyed examining and taking a deep dive into the West African linguistic links of Jamaican Patois and other Caribbean Creoles. Clearly there's a great deal of substrate transfer. It's also great, however, to see that linguists are finally trying to account appropriately for such instances instead of just branding every chance resemblance as substrate transfer. I hope you enjoyed it too. I've been Learn Hittite. As always, you've been fantastic. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff for the algorithm, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Goodbye for now.